First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to interact with all of you. Today, I'll be talking about walking cities and reading comics. I'm a cartoonist as well as a comic art researcher, but my experience, my professional experience has been that of a mobility, urban mobility practitioner and policymaker. I think both these interests have collided in today's presentation. So I'll be talking about how city has influenced comics and vice versa, and how reading comics per se for me and making comics for me is inextricably linked to the idea of a city. This is a quote from my favorite writer, A.K. Ramanujan. He's a poet. He's no more. He was an Indian English poet at the University of Chicago. So he wrote once that if you know a tale, you owe it not only to others, but to the tale itself to tell it. Otherwise, it suffocates you. So probably if you have a story to tell, you need to tell that story, rather than keeping it within yourself, or it's just not. It is not for others that you're telling a story. It is for the sake of the story that you're telling the story. So any story, anything that you can see, probably any lived experiences that you can recall can be converted or is a story in itself. And it all plays out in this big urban background that we are all living, which is the city. This is something that this is a script for a comic story that I did and published in the Mint. It is called The Morning Raga. This, I was traveling in a train in UP, very early morning, and then there was a lot of mist, and then I was listening to a Morning Raga by Bhimsen Joshi, and this suddenly I felt like crying. So I was trying to replicate that experience, but how I had written the script, I just wanted to share how I tried to get that experience across. I've not brought the images with me, but I just wanted you to understand how we tried to bring that feeling of sound into our comics. Eastern UP, 1988, gnawing cold of the December daybreak. First race, cloaked fields, a lonely mango tree at the end of the maze. Shrouded figures, hazier outlines, early workers in the sugarcane fields. Regular rattle of the Recknow mail, Bhimsen invoking the morning race. Tears rolling down the cheeks, and that feeling of not knowing why you cried. What I tried to do is to replicate the sound of the train, kind of like tatak, tatak, that kind of rhythm that you feel. So that I'm showing someone traveling in a train and looking out into the mist and looking at the figures and the workers in the field, and then there is this huge maze of sugarcane fields, and there's a lonely mango tree at the end of this field. So this feeling we have to really emote by using your language, and that's how we use it in comics, because otherwise comics falls really flat without this feeling of sound and image and text. This is another idea that you use. It's called the space, time, and three things. It's called the space, the time, and sequence. Three things. And this comics is also known as a sequential art. Without the sequence, there is no comics. There has to be one panel that has to supposedly follow the earlier panel. Then it becomes a sequence. So you might have seen Interstellar. So you probably very recently, and you'd all be enthralled by how Nolan uses this idea of time and space. And then physicists have talked about how time, space is a continuum as the fourth dimension. So comics really captures all of that. See, if you, how do you tell a story? This is a space. First panel, second panel, third panel is a space. And as I read from left to right, I am moving across the space, but I'm also moving across time. Because there is a cloud coming, there is someone looking up at the cloud. Then there is cloud has moved into the center of the frame. The person is looking at the cloud from a different angle. And then it again moves on to the other end of the panel. And so there is an experience of both time as well as space. And you experience time as you move through the space. So it's one way of showing. I mean, it's a way of telling the comic story. That's how comic narrative works. So you move across time when you move through space, a literally physical space of the paper. Here, there is also an experience of what is the time it will normally take for, your experience and your idea of how a cloud would move, what is your perceived kind of a time of how a cloud would move, what is your knowledge of that experience. These are all things that any cartoonist will try to understand, that shared knowledge of a system that we all are in, of a shared knowledge of the experience that we all share. This is what we tap into to get that feeling of understanding this narrative. See here, what I've tried to do is that there is one cloud and it is moving away from this person who is watching this, the cloud gazer. And probably we'll also know by the size of the cloud and the time it would have taken for the cloud to move from panel A to panel 3, panel 1 to panel 3. So this, what we're all trying to do is to tap into our experience of watching clouds, if you have, or having that sense of time that it's all inherent in us. So without understanding this idea of time and space, a comics creator will be at sea to tell stories. Because everything, so here if you see, this is one action panel where something is happening, he's looking at the cloud. This is another panel in which, again, another space or a panel in which something is happening there. And then another panel where something else is happening there. I've not shown a cloud here, a cloud here, a cloud here, a cloud here. So from one panel to another panel, there is something called as a jump, right? Here something is happening, then there is a jump. This is what we call a gutter. Or the panel borders, what we call the gutter, where this action jumps. And the reader is expected to jump and complete the meaning from one panel to the other. What happened between those panels, it is in our imagination. It is what we complete. The comics creator doesn't need to fill in that gap. It's very inherent to comic storytelling. Reader is expected to come up and fill the gap and complete the story. That is why comic is such a participatory exercise, and reader is very important in when you draw the comic. It's every comic artist kind of anticipates how this is going to be read. And as I said earlier, I'm going to tell it again and again, it is our shared understanding and knowledge of space, time, sound, everything, which is common to us all, which we all tap into to tell these stories. Comics, if you look at comics and the city, both have grown together actually. In 1900s, where the New York probably had a lot of migrants coming in and building the city, that is when comics also started to grow. Because migrants, built the city grew, then there were newspapers to cater to all this knowledge that is there. And then they had some leftover newsprint, which they didn't want to lose. So they printed comics on that leftover and said that free supplement comics along with the newspaper. Suddenly everyone caught on. And then even the migrant who was probably semi-literate or not knowing English very well, they found comics a very interesting medium to understand the place, because it's a part image, part text, so that you can understand what's happening even if you didn't know the complete story, you could make the story out of this. So that's how comics grew, and by 1930s, it was one of the major sources of entertainment for America. And you had a lot of comic supplements in the newspaper. Newspapers literally fought with each other, competed with each other to get the best cartoonists along with them. Superman happened in the 1930s, then there's a big superhero boom, and then from there, comics. So if you could say, between the First World War and the Second World War and a Great Depression in between, that is when the art of comics sort of stabilized itself, or found new ways of storytelling. That is when the basic semiotics of this art form got entrenched or kind of settled down. So city had a big role in comics growing. This is one of the pages of a lot of comics, different comics on the same page, of what you call the funnies page. You can see manga, which is in Japan, which is very ubiquitous, and then everywhere you go in Japan, you will find this comic art being. Manga is sold in millions, like every month or every week, it is bought out, and like 3 million copies are bought out, and there are people literally like these people who are drawing are called mangakas, or those people are literally like rock stars that huge following. And then so Japan has this great interest in comics, or their variety, what you call the manga. But you can also see it's an Astro Boy in the what you can see on the signal light, and the other, the bus is almost like every popular culture reference is made on the streets and the buses and the mobility systems, which is a very interesting way to kind of bring some life into the city and its systems. But as you already know, manga is completely the reading that is completely different from your normal Western comics. Most of you might have read that. If you read the typical Western comic, it is from left to right, from top to bottom. But manga kind of moves differently from left top to right corner, from left top corner to right bottom corner, like this. That's how it's read. On the other way, it's the Western thing is read on the other side. But after you keep reading a couple of Japanese comics, you will get into the system. So that makes me think like it's really like a city, right? Some cities have left-hand driving where you have to keep to the left, and then you have to walk on the right. Some other cities have keep right while driving, and you walk on the left. There are some places you can't go, some places you can go. So all these are systems that are made inside a city by the same participants who are using or navigating the system. It is not some rule that has come, the God has not sent some set of rules to work in a city. It's made by people, which is that system. Like comics is how you read a comic, or how meaning is generated, or how you navigate a comic, is very similar to how you navigate a place like a city that you're in. Okay, the next question could be, if you're so familiar with one place, then how do you read another city when you go? Likewise, like after a few days in a new city, you start reading that city as well. Similarly, after reading a few Japanese comics, you kind of understand how to read these comics. So there is no kind of any kind of difficulty a reader will get. So that is, it is nothing is kind of fixed. It's very lucid. It's very liminal in a way that you can play around with a lot of opportunities and possibilities. This is what comic storytelling is all about. There's multiple possibilities that you can use to tell a story, not just one, which is, we'll be looking at a few examples later. This is one of the comic that I did on Thrissur, which is my hometown. So probably when you just look, you're not going to look at the first panel. Probably the center image is probably how I will look at, different for different people. But this is my experience of walking in my city, where sometimes you can chance upon inconspicuous sun trees, like a city sidewalk throws up, untenable coins and abandoned meal tickets, long drawn lottery tickets, and a torn out obituary of your high school English teacher found dead near the Seago bar, going home after his daily round of cards in the Tekangad Maidan. So this is my experience of how I've seen things happening when you walk in a city, how you have experienced the sidewalks, things that you find on a sidewalk, some obituary of your high school English teacher, then suddenly you get from some peanut seller that then you suddenly realize that he was your English teacher and he's no more. So these are the things that makes a city, and your experience as a city like this. So even when the whole thing works as a number of panels stacked over each other, the first look is at the page. Only then probably you have a total look, and then you choose your panels to start. And again, we are constantly looking at the panels, going forth and back to the panels to complete the sequence. Because once I read this, only a walker with unhurried steps. So there is a jump in that, but I always keep on comparing the earlier panel and the next panel to make some generation of meaning. So it's always this wandering eye that you use in comics. It is not a linear eye. It is not a fixed eye. It keeps on doing this. If you look at someone reading a comics, it's always like this. It's not he will not stare at the page. He'll keep on doing like this, or she'll keep on doing like this. So that is how comics is read also. Some are very real places for people, like Toronto is my favorite comic artist. His name is Seth. He's great admirer of his work. It's a Good Life If You Don't Weaken. It's one of the best books I've ever read on graphic comic art. And then he writes on places in Ontario, Toronto, where all his stories are playing out. I probably write on Thrissur, where I am more comfortable with, where I know how things are happening, the way I have seen places. So this could be very real places for anyone to draw. But it doesn't necessarily be a real place. That's what I'm saying. It can be something like a completely made up place, like imagined place, like where Batman rules. Probably an allegory for New York City, but yeah, it's said to be an imaginary city, but it's an allegory for the New York City. So it doesn't necessarily be, and this place is very real for someone who reads Batman comics. It doesn't make any difference for him or her that it is not a real place or not. So the physicality of the place is very important if you're telling a story. The way you're placing a story in some place is very important when you're for the reader to experience that story. It can be an imaginary place. It can be a fantastical place like Flash Gordon's adventures across the Milky Way. It could be as fantastical as that. It could be very real as Thrissur for me. Probably that is why city has been a great source of stories for me, and for me, walking in the city or creating comics and reading comics is just one and the same, literally and figuratively. Thank you.